There is a phrase that I really like which says that in the eyes of a wise man, imagine yourself. A wise person, it is said that the eyes of a wise person are deep. Deep in the eyes of a wise person, you see as if they are having a dialogue, a hidden dialogue between a human and a god. Deep in their eyes, something very mysterious happens. This reflection turns us inward, seeking that very divine essence that exists within us. Seeking to recognize who we truly are. He is a man who reflects. Reflect on his heart, reflect on his identity, reflect on his values. And his actions are always illuminated by this reflection. He is a man who loves reflection, focused on reflecting on all the events of life, more and more considering the events of life filtered to his heart. Hello, welcome to another one of our chats at the start of our new Acropolis Art Week. In this Art Week, I decided to bring you a theme that seems quite interesting to me, a different place to seek beauty, which would be in human moral conduct. This is the theme of our conversation, the moral conduct that graces life. We realize that there are certain human actions, certain contexts, where we look and feel as if it were a work of art, the behavior of someone, the dignity of someone, the wisdom of someone. Sometimes in seems that in themselves would not have anything beautiful, quite the opposite, like, for example, an injured person, but someone is there helping, doing their best to get them out of that delicate situation. You find that person's gesture beautiful, even if the context is not something pleasant to behold. But the action of solidarity, fraternity, and helping one another is beautiful. In other words, the moral world is also endowed with an extraordinary beauty. And it is a bit of this beauty, this work of art out of human moral conduct, that we will discuss today, so that we can reflect a little on what it is made of, what a human being with moral beauty in their conduct is like. What would it be like to acquire? All these necessary qualities for this, to build within ourselves a beautiful moral life, that it would be like a work of art, perhaps the origin of all works of art, which is correct human conduct. The centered man, the one who possesses the necessary virtues for his life to also be considered a work of art. Shall we get started then? Let's start by talking about what makes something be considered a work of art. Among various attributes, we could say it is that which promotes harmony and elevates consciousness. So, at certain moments, the presence of certain people in our lives promotes harmony in the environment where they are and elevates our consciousness just by their presence, simply by being next to them. This type of person is someone who promotes beauty, promotes as if it were truly a work of art. To be able to work in favor of life, in other words. There are, we could say, but among various other attributes, there is the one of harmonizing, the one of elevating our consciousness and working in favor of life, because beauty is vitality. Beauty showcases life at its finest moments. How can we find all of this within human conduct? A human being who evokes this sense of harmony, of elevating consciousness, and that all their actions contribute to life, invigorating the world, because beauty is revitalizing. Shall we go? Let's see what this human being would be like. Let's imagine them. As the philosopher Epictetus said, the seeds of greatness within us need an image to grow and germinate. In other words, we need an image of a human being who can be morally beautiful so that we can mirror ourselves in that. To sculpt ourselves. What would this human being be like? What are the behaviors that make us? Proud to be human. This is also another way of looking at it. The human condition, which sometimes seems terrible, miserable, caught in the most absurd conditions of cruelty, of alienation, often also appears to us as sublime. What are those moments when we are proud to be human? Shall we list some of them? For example, the first thing I would like to draw your attention to is the contrast between everyday acts and heroic acts. We say that the two things have nothing to do with each other. Everyday acts are those we perform in the routine of our lives, for our survival, in the best way possible to fulfill our roles. And heroic acts are grand things. But what if I told you that one is a continuation of the other? Heroic acts do not arise from an ordinary life. They are born from what we call the everyday hero, the one who seizes the smallest details, the tiniest situations in life, to imprint this human mark of value. In other words, as it is said in the history of Greece, when talking about Sparta, which was an incredibly warrior-like civilization, why were they warriors and always victorious in wars? Because they trained in times of peace. This is the everyday hero who trains in times of peace. He can spend his entire life simply exercising his virtues within his everyday life. But sometimes, if the historical circumstance arises, he will display an exceptional brilliance and value that perhaps no one suspected he possessed. So, we'll talk a little more about this later. This duality, which perhaps is not a duality at all, but rather a continuation of a dignified everyday life and a heroic life that reveals itself in specific historical moments. Well, let's go. What will our man be like who leads such a beautiful moral life, so worthy of a human being, so worthy of admiration? One attribute we can say about him is that he has a great respect for what serves him, starting from the smallest things. He is a man who cherishes the objects, the things that serve him. He has a way of handling things with delicacy, with respect, as if each thing were endowed with life. All the work that is embedded in the small object, he treats it with care. He does not waste. The energy sources of nature. He does not waste nature's resources. He treats everything with the proper care, with the proper value, preserving his belongings in the best way possible. He shows, even towards inanimate objects, a great respect and a great affection. So, you will see that this is the kind of person whose belongings are well preserved over a long time. Values the small things, makes them last, and utilizes all the energies given to him in the best possible way. This is typical of a man who has the ability to face the world in a beautiful way. What else do we notice when we trace back? Imagine that we are trying to catch a glimpse of what this man is like, circling around him and getting to know his attributes. Another attribute we can notice is the pleasure in serving. Is what we call a helpful human being. Loves to serve. Loves when opportunities arise to be useful to someone, to be useful in a certain process, to step in at that moment when people need it, to add value. Then feels honored, dignified when is able to serve. He does not think that serving turns him into a servant or anything derogatory. He sees the act of serving as a dignity, as a wonderful opportunity. He is always ready to seize the openings that opportunity leaves, so that he can offer his service, so that he can contribute, so that something can be resolved, some situation can be eased, some work can be done. So this man is incredibly helpful, respects things, is very willing to serve, and enjoys serving. What else can we observe in an ideal man? We can say that he enjoys practicing and consistently practices acts of integrity and dignity, is the kind of person you cannot imagine lowering oneself to anything incoherent or vulgar. She has a dignity that characterizes her, giving her a gravity of presence, making her very presence in the environment carry a certain weight. She has dignity, she respects herself, and she respects others. Respects every occasion she has the opportunity to participate in. She is integral. She does not corrupt herself. She does not divide. She does not allow herself to be tempted, because no situation can compromise her human dignity. So he carries that weight on circumstance in his presence, a certain gravitas. Commands respect without asking for anything at all, that through the dignity and integrity demonstrates in his everyday actions. This is a human being. We are already beginning to see the first lines of the masterpiece. Imagine, try to picture this human being being built right in front of you, so that we can have a model. Try to imagine all these details I am giving you as if you were with chisels sculpting a statue. Add another detail, just one more detail. Let's see how this masterpiece looks when finished, and how it is one of the greatest, if not the greatest, works of art in nature. This man takes pleasure in beautifying his daily life without excess. He is not the kind of person who turns his home into a highly luxurious space filled with things. He does not need excess. But he does like to have his things organized, that everyday beauty that the philosopher Roger Scruton spoke of. Everyday beauty in the small details, everything organized, everything in the best possible way. He is the kind of person who, every now and then, brings a flower to his workplace to make the environment better and more beautiful. Not only with that, he beautifies with his smile, with his presence, with the way he interacts with people, with the interest he shows in others. In other words, his presence is also a factor of beautification. So he creates very beautiful environments wherever he goes. Beautiful in a discreet and dignified way. He is always harmonizing the environments he passes through, always with a quest to leave environments better than he found them. This is a very beautiful life maxim, which makes him always seek opportunities to add value, to make all the places he goes a little better, so that he leaves the place better than when he found it. This becomes a philosophy of life that you carry with you everywhere, a focus that allows us to constantly see opportunities for improvement wherever we pass by. What else can this human being tell us? He has a great ability to truly see others, to really see them. He is not the kind of person who just walks by someone and says, "Good morning, good afternoon, good evening." He is afraid to look into the eyes, afraid to delve into the other, afraid to want to understand the mystery of the other. In other words, he is superficial, does not look into the eyes of the people around, has no real interest in uncovering who the other person is, what they have to share with everybody, becomes superficial and regards others in a very superficial way. Sometimes, if you ask this man about the people who have been around him for years, for example, in the workplace, he cannot say much because he treats people like tools in a very superficial way. A man who graces his life looks deeply into the eyes of others with a respectful curiosity, but with a curiosity to know who the other person is and also to let himself be known, because that's how deep bonds are created. Therefore, he truly knows how to see the other. And it is not just that. He also truly knows how to listen to others. It is that person who, sometimes when we talk to certain people, you realize they are not listening to what you are saying. She is waiting for the pause you gave to throw in her argument. You notice that she is looking at you but not hearing anything, as if she already knows everything, as if she would not need anything you have to say. This is terrible because people end up isolated, thinking they have everything within themselves, and that there's nothing to exchange, nothing to learn from the other. This, at the very least, is a great presumption, a very misguided presumption. Every person who crosses our path has much to teach us, and we have much to teach them. And that is how we go that life. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. We emerge greater from all our relationships and make the other greater as well. Therefore, this man of moral beauty is a man who knows how to listen, is interested in what the other person has to say. For a very simple reason, he does not consider himself the owner of any truth. He is in constant self-improvement. Therefore, he is curious to see another angle in life, to see what he can learn from it, what he can also share. He is a curious person. He has a spirit of self-improvement. Therefore, he considers, sees the other, listens to the other exists for him. It is something worthy of being witnessed, worthy of being heard, worthy of being known. And this is related to that dignity he demonstrates at all times. What more has this man, who is our sculpture of moral beauty, what more we imagine he could have? Think along with me. A person, I imagine, would have a simple and natural joy simply thanks to the fact of being alive, thanks to life. In other words, every day that begins, he sees as a new opportunity, and he fills himself with this natural joy, which is inherent to life. He recognizes the value of life and is always grateful for having another opportunity, another blank canvas that appears before him, an opportunity to start anew. So, in any situation, he has not euphoria, but a natural joy for being alive, for being here, with so many beautiful things to know, to learn to exchange. He has this light, elevated state of mind, always with a gentle joy, simply because life itself is a great reason to maintain an elevated emotional state. Life is abundant. It has so much to offer us. And he realizes this, knows this, and is fulfilled in life, grateful for it, and taking advantage of the opportunities it brings him. So it is that person who has a lightness of spirit, as we sometimes say, that creates an atmosphere that feels light, because his presence brings this gentle joy wherever he goes. What else? He rejoices in knowing about victories, the victories of others, which is not as common as we might imagine. We live in a very competitive society where someone else's success can sometimes seem like it affects us, as if it somehow highlights our own failures, or we think, it could have been me who achieved that. A competitive society where we do not know how to win together, only how to win over, one over the other. It is necessary for some to be defeated for my victory to have flavor. Nakas man, however, genuinely knows how to rejoice in someone else's victory as if it were his own. So, when you congratulate someone on a gain, on a victory, you feel better. The nature is genuine. There is no hypocrisy. He truly enjoys and celebrates and rejoices in the victory of others. He considers, in a certain way, that the victory of any human being is a victory for humanity. There is this bond, this connection, a spirit of community, of unity. Therefore, he tests with genuine joy to the victory of anyone he knows about. He rejoices because someone has crossed their boundaries, because someone has gone beyond. This is a very rare and beautiful thing to witness. Just that alone would have the refinement of a masterpiece. It is beautiful to see someone with such a clean, pure, and light spirit, capable of doing this with such natural lay. What else contributes to the beauty of our man, who is a work of art? An ability to establish emotional bonds. In other words, wherever he is, he does not limit his emotional connections. It is that handful of people who surround me, and when I step outside, they are people who I am closed off to emotionally. I already have my emotional bonds at home. I do not want any more. This man, far from that, walks with an open heart. He is willing to establish as many emotional bonds as possible, as if he were leaving all of life together, connecting with everything and everyone. And the more we will weave life together, the closer we get to that great mystery, which is union, unity, the ultimate goal of all evolution. So, he is always ready to create connections to form a bond. In the first moment you are with him, quickly, within a few minutes, you will already feel a goodwill, a kindness that encourages you to form bonds. This man always has his heart in his hand, ready to share it, to leave it wherever he goes. Therefore, he is a person who, when you talk about him to someone, you will notice that many people, even without knowing him very deeply, show affection. They show affection for who he is, for the way he treats them, for the way he interacts, for the trail he leaves in the places he passes through. So he has a constant, unlimited willingness. He does not hold back with his heart. He is open to creating emotional bonds wherever he goes. There is no emotional selfishness. He is always open and building bridges for all those who wish to create human connections with him. It is also beautiful to see someone who leaves their heart wherever they go. There is a phrase I often quote from a philosopher of the last century, Sri Ram, who said that we must lose our heart, then go in search of it, and in doing so, we will discover that our heart is the heart of all things. Imagine, if everywhere we go, we leave behind an emotional bond created. Gradually, our heart becomes the heart of all things that belong to our life. And open to what is yet to come, always open to what will come. This is a man with a great capacity for love. What else exists in our man? A natural empathy and also a natural ability for understanding and forgiveness. This matter of empathy is something that we sometimes have to make a great effort to practice it. It is not so simple. There are psychological barriers that we create. When we think, for example, that we own some truth, that we are right about something, that we see the world better than others, we fail to put ourselves in the other person's shoes. Moreover, it is important for us to understand that empathy is not just about putting yourself in someone else's shoes. You have to strip away your opinions, your way of seeing the world, to understand the other person's psychological framework, to enter that psychological framework. Understanding the world from their experience, from their life, from the circumstances that weigh upon them. So you have to wear their life, wear their story, enter that psychological framework where they are to understand the world the way they understands it. This is to be able to be with them, to be able to help them, and also to learn about another point of view through which we can see life. We can see the world. In other words, a natural empathy. It is a person who knows they do not have everything, that their point of view is not the absolute truth, and has this vital curiosity to understand the other person's psychological framework. With great ease, they put themselves in someone else's shoes. By putting yourself in someone else's shoes, you greatly enhance your capacity for understanding. To consider the reasons that led this human being to a certain point. This does not mean that he will not be fair, that he will not guide each situation towards what it deserves, according to a principle of justice. But he has a very deep capacity for understanding. If it falls to him to judge, he has a very well-founded judgment, because he has this ability to understand, to grasp the foundations upon which the other person's decision was made. And above all, a capacity for forgiveness, to not let the mistakes of others affect you in any way, not being tied to bonds that can become chains. What could prevent him from moving forward? So he is very lighthearted in this as well. He holds no grudges. He has a great capacity for forgiveness. Can you already see how our diamond is shaping up? More and more details. We start to observe. What kind of special man would this be? Bappuses? I firmly believe that this possibility exists, that it can be in the world, and that we can pursue it. What else? Sobriety in the face of difficulties. This man has a state of soul. We can say he is a happy man because he is always consistent with his principles. Therefore, he always feels at peace with heaven and earth, always at peace, always serene. He is always worthy of the sleep of the just, meaning he is in a state of tranquility and knows that he is in harmony with himself, not betraying or contradicting himself. And this state of peace, serenity, and harmony with life grants him happiness. It is truly human happiness. So imagine that as if it were the stage of a theater, in a play with a single set, a curtain at the back. This set is like that state of serenity and happiness where he resides. Across this stage, actors pass by, objects pass by, many things pass by, adversities pass by, ugly things, beautiful things, aggressive things, affectionate things. A lot passes through the stage of life. But everything passes through the stage, which is enveloped by a state of serenity and happiness. He does not leave from there. In other words, the environment where these life events unfold is one of serenity, elevated consciousness, self-control, sobriety, and being at peace with oneself, at peace with heaven and earth. Is someone who never let their state of happiness be stolen by anything that passes through the stage. He knows how to maintain himself in the most difficult situations. You look. He might be focused, searching for a solution, but you feel that underlying serenity has not been abandoned. It is with him everywhere he goes. Nothing and no one makes him abandon that serenity at the back of the stage. It is always with him. The ability to accept things as they are presented, but without losing the initiative to improve them. In other words, I see what life is giving me, and I accept this current state of affairs, not to conform, but to change it. But to change it, I have to take it as a starting point, see it, understand it, accept it as it is. And from that acceptance, I begin to build the transformations that are necessary. When we do not accept things as they are, we do not have a foundation to make any transformation. We are based on a fantasy, on something that is not real, what we would like it to be, not what it actually is. Therefore, he has the clarity to accept things as they present themselves. I understand. These are the circumstances, these are the details, these are the elements involved. I understand. I accept. And from here, I will start to build a dignified way out, a better alternative than those that are currently presented. But he has this ability to accept as a starting point, which is very beautiful and very necessary, and it is connected to the virtue of clarity. This man is a lucid man. And this is also one more detail in the cutting of our diamond. Another angle that makes him beautiful. He is like a statue sculpted by a great artist. All these details that you start imagining, it is a statue sculpted by some intelligence of nature, which envisioned human nature as a very beautiful work. And the more difficulties occur in his life, the more beautiful he becomes. As if these things added up to help him smooth out the sharp edges he still has, transforming into a being that is increasingly sober with more self-control. Each time, he knows better how to face life's adversities without ceasing to be who he is. In other words, the difficulties refine him rather than bring him down. There is an Indian story that I really like, which says there was a temple where the floor was entirely made of marble. And in the center of that temple, there was a magnificent statue, sculptured from marble. And people would gather every day and walk on that ground. And they would pay tribute to the statue, giving it crowns of flowers and so on. And then they would leave. And then one day, one of those squares of the floor, one of those pieces of the marble floor started talking to the statue. And it said the following: I think it is very unfair what happens. Ha, why do you think that's unfair for? Said the statue. And the floor responds, we came from the same quarry, we are made of the same marble. Why do we hold so many ceremonies for you? Did these so many flowers, and for me, they simply trample over. That is unfair, it should not be like this. And then the statue responds to him and says, do you remember when our master took us from the quarry? That he started working with a chisel on you, and you constantly complained. About the pain, you asked him to stop. You couldn't take it anymore. He accepted your requests and simply flattened you and turned you into a piece of the floor. When he started working on me with chisels, I also felt the same pains. It was also difficult for me, but I saw in his eyes the dream he had for me shining brightly. And I accepted the difficulties. And I let him shape me in that beautiful way as he dreamed. That's why I am what I am, and you are what you are. Because I embraced all the necessary hardships to become the masterpiece my master envisioned in me. In other words, all the difficulties were absorbed in such a way that I knew I was building within myself the perfect statue, the one my master dreamed of. I find this story very beautiful, very interesting, because it shows an aspect of this man we are working on. The wisdom of knowing that difficulties are not random. They come to strike against those sharp edges that we need to smooth out. So, it is a sober acceptance, while at the same time taking all the necessary action to get out of that situation. Of course, he does not settle for anything, but he knows that these situations are not random, that they are carving into him what his master, whoever that may be, the great master of the universe, dreams of, a finished sculpture of the human being, the perfect sculpture of humanity. And he submits to this process consciously with complete serenity. He leaves a trail of elevated consciousness. Wherever he goes, he does so. So, that kind of person who sometimes, if you're feeling critical, if your consciousness is low, if you are conflicted, you encounter this person. Even on the street, talking with her for 5, 10 minutes, he elevates your consciousness as if it spirals upward, reaching as high as it can go. From being with him, you realize a bunch of good reasons to feel well. You see a completely different angle of reality. He takes you to the highest point your consciousness can reach. Just a few minutes with him and your mood changes. He is a person who, wherever he goes, leaves the trademark of who he is. Therefore, when you enter the environment, you might even notice, so-and-so must have been here. The way the environment is, the way we perceive the mood of the people, this environment must have had someone, like him or him himself, passing through here. Therefore, he leaves a very easily identifiable trail. He elevates the consciousness of people wherever he goes. A bit more of our masterpiece, taking shape. One can live a life like this, an entire life, doing these small things at home, on the street, at work, uplifting people, giving your best to others, learning from them, teaching. You can spend an entire life like this. But it can also happen that a circumstance arises. I don't know, a war breaks out, something like that. Those unpredictable events in history. And in these circumstances, this man of such perfect morals sometimes stops being an everyday hero and can become a great hero. Because then comes to light where his virtues are amplified to their fullest potential. He might reveal a value that no one even suspected he had before. Within his life so, disciplined, orderly, just, and beautiful, he suddenly shows something extraordinary, an extraordinary ability to respond to circumstances. And then, from an everyday hero, he has the potential to become a complete hero. If circumstances so demand from him, he has this seed of heroism within him, because the way he faces the small challenges of life has a touch of heroism. In other words, he has the seeds of heroism within him. So, we will look at some historical cases that I brought for you, just two, so we can get a sense of how this is not a fable. We are talking about a real situation. Two men connected to World War II, two quite interesting figures. One of them even became a saint, which was Friar Maximilian Maria Kolbe. This is a very beautiful story. He was a Franciscan friar. He was killed in 1941 in the Auschwitz concentration camp. But how did Kolbe die? He was a very charismatic figure. He was quite a powerful creature who was arrested by the Nazis and sent to a concentration camp. I am here omitting several details. He was a man with great leadership, a deep piety, and he was arrested and sent to a concentration camp. And there, with all the terrible hardships experienced in Auschwitz, he tries to keep spirits high, tries to console people, tries to ease the pain of those around him. Until at a certain moment in the Auschwitz camp, the escape of 3 prisoners occurred. And the Nazis, when there was a prisoner escape, they would take prisoners from the concentration camp, arbitrarily choose town, and place them in a specific area to die of hunger and burst in deprivation as a way to set an example so that others would not attempt to escape. And these Nazis gathered all the prisoners in the courtyard and went on to choose the time who would be sacrificed. Suddenly, they choose a man who was a Polish sergeant, and this Polish sergeant breaks down in tears, imagining that he would never see his wife again, never see his children. He had a family. He would never return to see them. And Kolbe sees this sergeant's situation. So, distraught, for never being able to see his family again, he steps forward, then leaves the ranks, which is a very bold act. No one can even say why he did not get shot right there. He goes up to the Nazi who is leading the operation and asks for his life to be exchanged for that of the man who had a family, who had children, so that he could die in his place. He was a man he didn't even know. And he asks for his life to be exchanged for that of this man. And the Nazis accept that this man, the sergeant, is spared. He survives the war and lives to quite an old age, in fact, while Maximilian Kolbe dies in that cell where the 10 prisoners were placed. But it is said that the whole time he was singing, praying, lifting the spirits of the men. And he, who was a man with very fragile health, suffered from tuberculosis, had constant pneumonia, and was in poor health. He was one of the last to die. 2 weeks later, he was still alive, and still trying to lift the spirits of the 2 men who were still alive with him. In other words, he did not want to leave, did not want to die, without first consoling even the last man who was with him. He ended up being killed and his body was burned. In short, Maximilian Kolbe was a friar who conducted his religious ceremonies, had his very specific work. He was dedicated to spreading devotion to Virgin Mary. He was a figure who fulfilled his duties. Everyone admired him, but he was a simple man. A man, we could say, an everyday hero. But in a circumstance like this, he showed his brilliance. He demonstrated an enormous capacity for compassion, for selflessness, for giving his life so that someone else could enjoy theirs. Maximilian Kolbe was canonized by Pope John Paul II, also a Pole, which is quite interesting. Kolbe was Polish. In the end, even the man, whose life he saved, was still alive at the time of his canonization. He was present at his canonization. He passed away at quite an old age. It is an example that I find very beautiful, which is why I wanted to share it with you, how beautiful it is for a human being to be capable of such a burst of greatness. How beautiful is the moral strength of someone to uphold such a decision. The beauty of character in a man who upholds a decision like that. The other case, which is also a war story, is a somewhat different one, the case of Oskar Schindler. The one from Schindler's List, the film we watched by Spielberg, which moved us so deeply. He is a historical hero who truly existed. Before the event of him saving the lives of many Jews, he was an absolutely ordinary man with behavior that was even somewhat questionable, let's say, ambitious, opportunistic, wanting opportunities to advance in life. Nothing, nothing exceptional. But he was a man who carried within him a great beauty, which at a certain moment came to light when he saw the way the Nazis, and he was affiliated with the Nazi Party. In fact, when he saw the way the Nazis treated the Jews, the massacre they carried out, he felt this pain deeply and decided to take a very courageous stand. He was a small German industrialist, and he had a factory that produced enameled kitchenware, pots, enameled kitchen pieces. And his employees, his 1,000 employees, he did everything to protect them from being taken to concentration camps. So he began to bribing all the officers who wanted to take his employees to the concentration camp. He spent his entire fortune on bribes, on elements to try to negotiate with the Nazi officers so that his men would not be taken. He requested that the location of his factory be moved to a more distant place, and there he took his name. He managed to save, in total, 1,200 Jews. Using everything he could, he completely ruined all the money he had, his factory, everything he owned. He ended the war absolutely penniless, obtaining things on the black market to bribe the Nazi officers, negotiating in every possible way, up to the point that he was even detained 3 times. For testimonies, because the Nazis began to suspect him, meaning there was a serious risk to his life. But he held on until the end and managed to save 1,200 Jews. He is one of those who, in Israel, is considered one of the honored among the earth, those who, during such a harsh time, worked for the preservation of the Jews who were so harshly persecuted. Notice that this is an even more curious case because Oskar Schindler was an ordinary man. Even with some flaws, a behavior that was not exemplary at all. That, faced with a circumstance of great injustice, he was able to bring to light that beauty within him. The capacity for extreme sacrifice and constant risk, risking his life, to save these 1,200 Jewish prisoners. So it is another story that I show you so that we can understand how there is this transition between the everyday hero and the historical hero. The exceptional hero, the one who exposes themselves to great risks for an act of greatness. How there is this transition, which is a continuity when the historical opportunity arises for it, when it is necessary. An upright man, a man whose moral behavior is beautiful, he does not show off, he does not seek recognition. That if there is an opportunity to do something greater, there is a high probability that you have someone there who will step forward. A person who will be on the front line to continue benefiting and helping humanity. Continuing with our portrait of this perfect Ling, let's also talk a little about his thoughts and feelings. What generates these harmonious, beautiful actions? How do they think? How do they feel? What kind of feelings does a man like this have? Thoughts and feelings that create a very solid, very beautiful moral structure. For example, ethical, aesthetic, and mystical feelings. What does that mean? A great love for ethics, for justice, for things that are done according to the law of nature, according to a code of goodness, of human principles. In other words, a deep love for ethics, for justice, for everything that is right. Aesthetic feelings. He has the ability to be amazed by things that are harmonious, things that are noble, things that are beautiful. In the face of the beautiful acts of a human being, to admire those who are great in history and try, in some way, to mirror them. He knows how to recognize human beauty, the beauty in human life, in a very clear way. He is a promoter of harmony. Therefore, he has very strong aesthetic feelings. Beauty is directly linked to harmony. And mystical feelings, which is an exceptional capacity for sacralization. Nuta Ilade, a philosopher from the last century, used to say a phrase that I always use, which I find very beautiful, that the sacred is the thumption of giving meaning. A man with this moral beauty is capable of turning simple life situations into something like a ceremony. Imagine that you, at a certain moment, are walking in the late afternoon alongside someone you love and admire deeply. The two walk in silence, taking in the descent of the evening. This moment can be transformed into a sacred moment, a special moment where I was beside someone I loved and we were witnessing one of the great beauties of nature. A late afternoon, a sunset, and that moment seems like it can never be consumed by time. It is a special moment, a moment that is sacred. A simple moment where you hold the hand of someone going through a tough time and give it a squeeze. This is a ceremonial moment. He is capable of rescuing things from banality to sacredness. He is capable of placing this special halo of sacredness on the simple and pure scenes of life. He is capable of making life sacred. In other words, he has very strong mystical feelings. In other words, a very delicate, complex, and refined structure, capable of seeing the details of life and seeking opportunities to make life a succession of beautiful and sacred acts. He has feelings of compassion and solidarity. Of course, he is always looking in some way to anticipate the pain of others, to alleviate it, avoid it, console it in some way. There is a phrase from a 19th century philosopher, Helena Blavatsky, where she said, "Do not let a tear dry on the face of the last of mortals, before you have acted upon the pain that caused it." In other words, commit yourself to human suffering. Human suffering, I do not ignore it. It is my concern. A person I pass by and see their face contorted with pain, with suffering, it is not something that does not concern me. It does, because it is human. This concerns me, my family. In other words, a deep sense of compassion and solidarity, being ready to offer oneself to those who suffer, and doing your best to alleviate that suffering. This is also a disposition, a very profound feeling in this morally beautiful person we are building. What else can we consider for him? Feelings of gratitude, which are among the most beautiful feelings we can have. A broad and deep gratitude, gratitude for life, gratitude for being here. Gratitude for all those who have crossed your path, who, for better or worse, have taught you many things. Gratitude for all the elements of life that surround you, seeing beauty in every detail and harmony. He maintains a constant state of gratitude for everything he is, for everything he receives, for each day that dawns in his life. And gratitude is one of the most beautiful and noble feelings we possess. Therefore, he knows how to practice gratitude. He knows how to perceive all the gifts with which he has been blessed. He knows how to recognize and how to be thankful. A feeling of true love, which is another complex thing, right? We would have to make a long digression here about what true love is. But basically, I use a bit of the Platonic mindset that there are feelings which are very horizontal, like a give and take. It is like imagining two lovers. The girlfriend gives a little kiss to the boyfriend, and if the boyfriend does not give a little kiss back, she already feels like she is losing. I gave a little kiss and got nothing in return. In exchange, where there is a constant demand from both sides. Many so-called romantic relationships are like this, horizontal. In those genuine relationships of love are those that are vertical. I love because I recognize the other's need for my love. I love because I must, because I am a human being, and I expect absolutely nothing in return. I find fulfillment in the very act of loving. What is my satisfaction? Exactly, just being in love. I do not need anything else. I find fulfillment in the act of loving. I do not need anything in return. It is a bit like that feeling when it is genuine, the feeling parents have for their children. They do not want anything in return. They simply want Spain to be happy, to follow their own path. The feelings of love this man has are like that. He finds fulfillment in loving, therefore, he distributes his love generously and does not expect any kind of recognition or return. He finds fulfillment in the very act of loving. This is the deep and true love that such a person practices, and he always feels good. At no point does he consider that someone was ungrateful or that someone did not reciprocate. He expects nothing in return. He simply hopes to have the opportunity for his love to always be flowing, always being given wherever he goes. For him, this is already a privilege in itself, already a gain. Feelings of kindness. A deep desire to influence the destiny of things in such a way is to bring them closer to that point where they need to be, closer to their ideal, to push things, people, living beings, everything, a millimeter more in the direction of their ideals, their fulfillment, their completeness. He wants his influence in the world to be guided by the idea of goodness, that he be a benefactor, bringing good to the world. May his influence in life always be aimed at benefiting others. For him, this is yet another achievement. Seek opportunities and make sure to check how the relationships are going to see if he is present in all staces, in all places, taking the opportunity to benefit, in other words, being a servant of the idea of goodness. His thoughts, now moving on to thoughts of admiration for those who perform worthy acts. In other words, he knows how to admire a man with dignity. He knows how to appreciate the virtues of a human being. And every time he sees a human being like that, he feels tremendously gratified for the opportunity to witness such an act. He takes all these acts as references. He is always seeking more and more references to grow. Therefore, he knows how to recognize and admire the moral greatness of another human being. And he does it in the best way possible whenever he has the opportunity. And he rejoices for having found someone like that, for having had the opportunity of his life to meet someone morally beautiful. The absence of thoughts of hatred or resentment. He is very light. He works very lightly to carry heavy burdens. He does not carry burdens that do not serve his purpose in life, which is to love and benefit others. Neither hatred nor resentment serve either purpose, so he would not carry such a burden. He would not bring that with him. So there is a great lightness, all these burdens. He is then capable of leaving this behind because he rigorously fulfills his duty to love and benefit. That would be incontestable. So this is a person you feel is always clean, very transparent, very calm, without all these afflictions. And these terrors that a person has, which is us, most of us, with difficulty forgiving, with difficulty forgetting. He has thoughts of seeking that which remains amidst that which is fleeting. He is always seeking the enduring, the greater value of life, and not giving too much importance to small details that sometimes go wrong, little things. He always seeks what is greater, a greater meaning for events. What is greater within me? That is, my consciousness elevated to its maximum potential. He seeks what is definitive, what truly makes a difference, and leaves behind trivialities. He is not a man given to trivialities or frivolities. He is always seeking what is endowed with value, what is enduring, what makes a difference in human life, what adds up. He has thoughts of genuine interest in understanding the mystery that resides in each person, in each life, in each object. In other words, he is interested in understanding this mystery, which is life. To know all the details of nature's plan, what it intended with all this, and to marvel at life. He is that man who, even as an adult, perhaps even elderly, still behaves like a child, gazing at the pattern on a butterfly's wing, because he sees it as a miracle of nature, something like that. And he never ceases to be amazed by the miracles of nature. He is always attentive, awake, like the eyes of a child, at any age, curious to understand the mysteries of life. He has thoughts of genuine concern for humanity and the world. In other words, for him, there is no one too far away to be beyond his concern. There is someone suffering on the other side of the world. This is among his concerns. He seeks in some way to have a positive attitude towards these people. If he can, he will help them physically. If not, he will at least deeply root for these people. A deep affection. He will reach out to these people. And he will suffer with them and rejoice with them. In other words, he considers that the problem of humanity is his problem. His humanity is his family. Therefore, he suffers and rejoices with humanity's gains and losses. Thoughts of seeking ways to promote unity. This is also very common in this type of man. He understands that this is the logic of life. This is the meaning of life. We came from unity unconsciously, and now we must return to it consciously. Our actions must aim to promote everything that brings together, everything that adds, everything that unites, everything that makes things fit into their rightful place, like a giant puzzle. We must recover the lost unity, but now, consciously, I'm doing active well. Therefore, he who is a distributor of harmony is always striving to work in favor of union, unification, and harmonization. Of the meeting between people, of the ability to create bonds among them. He is always a promoter of unity. He knows that unity, union, is the fundamental attribute of God. And he seeks to get closer to this point always in all his actions. He has a constant willingness to learn above all, to learn how to live. He does not consider himself an expert in this matter or in any other. He is always eager to learn. Plato used to say that the greatest obstacle to learning is thinking you already know. This is a man who has the humility to know that he does not know much. So, he is always in a spirit of learning. Above all, to learn lessons about life from those who have lived well and have left us some legacy of teaching. He has this vital curiosity to learn about life and is always gladly receiving these teachings left by those who knew how to live. He considers this his greatest treasure. In other words, he has the spirit of a learner throughout his entire life. No matter his age, he has the spirit of a learner. So he is always alive, always. Active, he is always youthful, facing life with a spirit of improvement. He has the habit of reflection. There is a phrase that I really like which says that in the eyes of a wise man, imagine yourself. A wise person, it is said, that the eyes of a wise person are deep. There, deep in the eyes of a wise person, you see as if he is having a dialogue, a hidden dialogue, between a man and a god. Deep in his eyes, something very mysterious happens. This reflection turns us inward, seeking that very divine essence that exists within us. Seeking to recognize who we truly are, he is a man who reflects. He reflects on his heart, reflects on his identity, reflects on his values. And his actions are always illuminated by this reflection. He is a man who loves reflection, turning back to reflect on, all the events of life, increasingly considering the events of life filtered through his heart. There is a quote from a contemporary writer, Stephen Pressfield, which I find very beautiful, very interesting, where he says that the great task of man is to push humanity forward, even if it's just a millimeter on his long journey back to God. This man is always seeking to do just that, to push humanity forward, even if it is just a millimeter on its long journey back to God, looking for every opportunity to do so. And for that, he takes the lead, diving deeply within himself through the method of reflection, seeking the deepest tools, his deepest identity, his values, to be able to act with these tools in the world. Imagine, were you able to doubt this masterpiece in your imagination? People of this kind exude peace, warmth, depth, support. People of this kind are a work of art. And perhaps what we can consider is that all other works of art are born from this one. This is the greatest beauty, the enduring beauty, the beauty that time will never be able to erode. It is the beauty of constructing a morally harmonious, refined human being. A human being as a work of art. And that is a goal. Many times people ask me what my life goal is, what my purpose is, what my ideal is. For all of humanity, there is but one ideal, which is a wise man, a man with values, virtues, wisdom, a bit like the man we just described. And it is very interesting for us to visualize and build this image so that we can say, that is where I want to go in that direction. I also want to sculpt myself to transform my life into a work of art. They are a product of the combined action of nature, which endowed them with wonderful latent powers, along with human nature. In other words, their own consciousness, their own will, which brought these latent powers to light. So, it is a partnership between nature and human nature. One produced the gifts, and the other brought them to light and lived them. And this created a wonderful human being. In all of us, there exists this dual possibility. Nature has given us gifts. It is enough now for our consciousness and our will to work to bring them to forth, to make them practical in our lives. In other words, the potential of this man we speak of exists in every human being. And finally, what I would like to share with you is a phrase to inspire us in relation to everything we've discussed. Sculpting ourselves, using the human ideal as a model, is the most perfect and refined of works, which allows the birth of all other arts from it. In other words, at the end of the day, the great work of art that we must build, the first that generates all others, is the work of art of constructing ourselves as human beings, as perfect as possible in terms of what is expected of a human being, in terms of what nature made us to be. Finding our place in the universe, being genuinely human, and that is very beautiful. That is a work of art. That's what I would like to share with you. I hope it has been a good exercise of imagination, inspiring for you to think about it. Many times we say we do not have references, but we are capable of, with our imagination, creating a reference. If you do not want historical references, if you doubt them, create a plausible reference with your imagination. All of this is possible. These are not things from another world. A plausible reference of what it means to be a human being who, with all honesty, with all justice, with all dedication, works on building themselves. A big hug to all of you.